After years of silence, she was invited to her sister's wedding. Not as family, but as spectacle. She showed up in uniform. Followed left the room. They never imagined I'd show my face. Hell, I wasn't sure I would either. The invitation arrived like a relic from a life I barely remembered, thick cardstock, gold script, smugly formal. My title blared from the front like a warning sign, Major Donald Elizabeth. No Evelyn. No EV. And certainly no sign that I was still anyone's daughter. Just a rank. Just a role. Easier for them to digest, I suppose. 6 years. That's how long it had been since anyone in this family said my name out loud. Not a single call, not even a forwarded voicemail, unless by accident. Not even when the blast outside Hellman nearly left me deaf. Not when I got promoted. Not for my birthday. They had mastered the art of vanishing, strategic silence dressed up as dignity. And yet here it was, an invitation to Susan's wedding. Inside, a handwritten note, brief and surgical, behave. No warmth. No curiosity. Just a demand. A warning, cloaked in civility. I turned the card over, weighed it in my hand like an old piece of evidence. How had they even found me? Probably not my mother, not unless she hired someone. Maybe it was the Army's event staff, forwarding everything marked personal. Or maybe Susan wanted me visible in the background, proof the Maddox family could forgive, even the ones they tried to forget. But this wasn't a peace offering. This was performance art. I wasn't invited to join them, I was summoned to serve a purpose. That's the thing people misunderstand about vengeance. It doesn't always arrive with fire. Mine began with a stunned, aching stillness. And a question that pulsed like a bruise beneath my skin. Did they remember how to write my name? Outside, wind pressed against the window like a breath held too long. I watched a platoon of new recruits marching across the Stonemaier field, bright-eyed, booming with promise. They hadn't yet learned what it meant to be erased by the very people who raised you. I watched them until I couldn't bear the envy. A knock. Sharp. George stepped in before I answered. "You going?" he asked, already eyeing the envelope. He had a talent for asking questions he already knew the answer to. "Invitation just came through," I muttered. He snorted, half amused. "That what we're calling this?" I gave him nothing. Because we both knew this wasn't an invitation. It was a stage cue. Maybe a final inspection before they shut the door for good. And I hadn't decided yet whether to leave them wanting or show up and remind them exactly who I became without them. One thing was certain, I'd wear my stars. Not out of vanity. Out of necessity. To make damn sure they remembered, I did this without them. Virginia appeared unchanged, as if frozen in amber. Blossoms in full bloom. Lawns carved with geometric precision. Sidewalks so clean they looked artificial. It was the kind of place that performed perfection, a diorama for strangers. I pulled into the cul-de-sac, parked across from the house I once tried to forget. It looked untouched. Not just familiar, untouched. Same shutters. Same hedges. Same lie. I hadn't been here since the funeral. Even then, I didn't sit. There wasn't a seat left for me, not at the front, not anywhere. I stood in full dress uniform while my mother clasped Susan's hand and wept like nothing had ever broken between us. Today, it was the rehearsal dinner. And somehow, that felt more brutal. I knocked. A pause. Then a whisper of lemon polish slipped through the doorway. My mother's scent, always more judgment than fragrance. The door opened, slow and deliberate. She scanned the uniform first, then the ribbons, then my face. "Elizabeth," she said, the name tasting foreign on her tongue. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Not for Susan. No greeting. No smile. Just a calm reprimand dressed as grace. I gave her a nod, stiff, impersonal. Inside, the house was a mausoleum of memory. The chandelier still cast its cold light. The same china gleamed behind glass. And the same crackling silence waited at the dining table. 14 people were already seated. 15 chairs arranged with surgical intent. Mine was at the very end, near the kitchen, where the heat would brush your back just enough to remind you didn't belong. Nowhere near Susan. Nowhere near the center. Strategic. Obvious. No one announced me. No one paused conversation. I was simply there, draped in military formality, occupying the space of a ghost. A cousin gave me a fleeting glance, then leaned toward someone at her side. I caught the word security, mouthed like a curse. I almost laughed. Let them worry. Let them whisper. They spent years pretending I didn't exist. Now they get to wonder what I've come back for. They hadn't planned on seeing me again. If I'm honest, neither had I. The wedding invite had arrived like a thrown gauntlet, dense cream cardstock, embossed in arrogant gold, with one name printed at its center like a brand: Major Donald Elizabeth. Not Evelyn. Not Evie. Certainly not our daughter. Just rank. Just brass. Something they could swallow without choking on it. It had been 6 years since I'd heard my parents' voices, unless you count the time a misdirected voicemail surfaced on my secure line, or the occasional murmur of my name at some formal function, always followed by a silence too thick to cut. No birthday greetings. No calls when my convoy hit that mine outside hellmand and left me one tone away from permanent silence. Just absence. Chosen, crafted, intentional. And now, out of nowhere, I receive an invitation to Susan's wedding. Inside it, a single word scrawled by hand: behave. No warmth. No apology. Just a directive, like I was some loaded weapon they hoped wouldn't go off in public. I turned the card over in my hand, half expecting it to vanish like smoke. How did they even find me? Probably didn't. Maybe the Army's ceremonial team passed it along. Or maybe Susan dug up my address to tick some PR box: Family Unity, the Maddox brand, a disgraced sister in full regalia as a token of forgiveness. This wasn't reconciliation. It was theater. I hadn't been summoned as kin. I was being deployed as proof. People assume revenge starts with rage. Mine didn't. It began with silence. Then disbelief. And finally, something quieter, more corrosive: curiosity. Did they still know how to spell my name? Outside, the wind scraped its fingers along the window pane, like it had a secret to share. I leaned into the glass, eyes tracking the drill ground below where a new wave of recruits shouted through their paces, faces too green to know how quickly family can become a battlefield. They didn't know what it meant to be erased by the very hands that once held you. Not yet. I envied their ignorance. A knock cut through the quiet. George stepped in without asking. He never knocked. Never needed to. "You going?" he asked, eyes already fixed on the invitation. He had the uncanny ability to skip past words and land directly on the truth. "Just came in," I said flatly. His brow lifted. "That's what we're calling it?" I didn't bother replying. We both knew this wasn't an invitation. It was a calculated risk. A silent warning. And I hadn't made up my mind yet, whether to walk away for good or walk in, armored in stars, and remind them that I wasn't gone. I was simply inconvenient. Either way, they'd see me. That much I'd ensure. Virginia spread out before me like a picture-perfect brochure: flawless gardens, polished streets, everything so clean it felt unreal. Too precise. Too curated. The kind of place that looked idyllic, as long as you didn't step too close. I pulled into the cul-de-sac and parked across from the house I once lived in, though lived feels generous. Nothing had changed. And that somehow made it worse. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Even then, they hadn't saved me a seat. I stood in full dress blues at the back, while my mother wept between Susan and Uncle Jacob like I was just some passing uniform. A symbol, not a person. But this was Susan's rehearsal dinner. And for reasons I couldn't explain, not even to myself, it hurt more. I knocked. Silence. Then, faintly, I caught it: lemon polish. Nancy's signature. The scent of obsessive order, dressed up as domestic grace. The door opened slowly. She stood there, gaze fixed on the medals across my chest before moving reluctantly to my face. "Elizabeth," she said, crisp and unreadable. "Try not to cause trouble. Susan doesn't deserve that. Not hello. Not you look well. Just an instruction. A leash." I gave a nod so slight it barely counted. Inside, the house was frozen in time. Same gleaming china. Same ornate chandelier. Same undercurrent of tightly coiled tension that hummed beneath the floorboards. 14 people at the table. 15 chairs. Guess which one had my name, unspoken though it was? The seat at the far end, tucked beside the sideboard where the heat from the kitchen would press against your back just enough to make you sweat. Deliberate. Peripheral. Not beside Susan. Not even within polite reach. They'd thought about this. No one stood to greet me. No one said my name aloud. I was simply there. A military silhouette among linen and silver. An unspeaking specter. One cousin glanced up, caught sight of the ribbons on my chest, and leaned in to whisper to the girl beside her. I didn't need to strain to catch the word. Security. I smiled, lips barely parting. Let them wonder. They spent years pretending I didn't exist. Now they'd have to wonder why I came back. And what, exactly, I planned to do. I didn't flinch. Not even a twitch. Maybe you felt it too, walked into a room haunted by your own memories, only to find yourself a stranger inside them. When that happens, it's not the laughter you remember. It's the silence. The kind that presses against your chest like a weight no one else sees. People talk about being forgotten like it's passive. But the truth is uglier. Sometimes, they erase you right in front of you and call it grace. The reception hall gleamed like something out of a bridal catalog. White tablecloths, gold trim, an obscene ice sculpture of interlocked initials dripping elegance onto marble. Everything screamed curated perfection. Until you reached the seating chart. I stood before the brass easel, scanning names. Table 1, of course, was reserved for Susan and Daniel. Table 2 for our parents. Tables 3 and 4 filled with our cousins and their carefully assembled lives. My name? Nowhere. No Major Donald Maddox. No Elizabeth. Just a subtle insult scrawled in lowercase near the bottom. E. Maddox, table 12. Back near the catering doors. The napkin at my place setting was a slightly paler shade than the others. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to make a point. I'd seen less strategic placements on an enemy map. Susan floated through the ballroom like a monarch on parade. Every curl in place, every smile perfectly timed. The sort of beauty that wins over photographers, editors, and strangers in airports. She paused near my table, just long enough to twist the knife. I told them not to make your section 2. Military, she said, flashing that disarming grin. Wouldn't want it to feel like work. She walked off before I could reply. She always did. I wasn't surprised. But I'd saved her fiancé's life once, and now I was being seated like an afterthought. A problem they didn't want near the head table. The toasts began. My father stood first. To new beginnings, he said, eyes never landing on me. My mother followed. To loyalty and grace. Her voice carried like crystal. So did the omission. Neither acknowledged the daughter who had flown 12 hours in full dress blues. No welcome. No thank you. No mention. Then Susan took the mic. A champagne flute dangled from her fingers like an accessory, and she spun slowly as if center stage on Broadway. Can you believe it? She sang out. Even my big sister showed up flown in from wherever she's guarding doors these days. Laughter bloomed. Loud. Comfortable. The kind of laugh people let loose when the target's supposed to be too far away to hear it. Only this time I wasn't. Then came Nancy, my mother, always ready with a dagger disguised as manners. She may be the family shame, she said lightly, but at least she's punctual. The room erupted. Champagne glasses clinked. No discomfort. No hesitation. Just merriment wrapped around mockery. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I rose, unhurried, precise, and lifted my glass for the first time all evening. The room quieted not because I demanded it, but because silence is sometimes the sharpest blade in the drawer. I took a slow sip. Let it settle. Then I said, evenly, the people I guard outrank everyone in this room. That was all. But it landed like thunder. No one laughed after that. Not because they understood the weight of it, but because they no longer knew what category to file me under. Not the failure. Not the ghost. And certainly not the joke. I remained standing, not to posture, not to retaliate, but because I needed them to see me. Not flinch away. Not pretend. Just see. And that's when I noticed him. Daniel. Standing across the room, perfectly still. His gaze locked on mine, jaw clenched, spine straightened. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't joined the charade. And now he was moving slow, measured, steady in that unmistakable way only soldiers walk. He passed the cousins. The acquaintances. The table of old family friends. He passed my mother, who hissed something at him sharp enough to slice skin, but he didn't break stride. He passed Susan, whose smile faltered mid-glance. Her fingers tightened on the glass, as if it could anchor her. He stopped in front of me 1 pace away. Close enough to be heard. Distant enough to be deliberate. Then, in front of everyone, Daniel saluted. Sharp. Clean. Absolute. And in a voice that split through the glitter and the gossip like a razor, he said, "This is Major Donald Elizabeth." My commanding officer. Please forgive my wife. There was a collective gasp, the kind that sucks air from the entire room. Susan's expression cracked. The smile collapsed. The glass slipped from her hand, struck the floor, and shattered like a verdict. She fainted. Someone screamed. A champagne flute burst against tile. My mother stood so fast her chair clattered over. And me? I didn't blink. Because this wasn't vengeance. This was acknowledgement. And after all this time, after the exile, the silence, the sneers, it was exactly what I had come for. The ballroom didn't erupt. It chilled. Not in shock. In understanding. Near the wine bar, someone rose, Joshua, posture still sharp despite retirement. He raised a silent salute. No applause. Just quiet, deliberate recognition. Then another, Donald. And a third, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone who had once worn stars on her shoulders too. She didn't speak. Her eyes said enough. For salutes. For undeniable truths finally surfaced. And suddenly, I was no longer invisible. My mother opened her mouth, tried to regain control. This isn't the place. But no one was listening to her anymore. The center had shifted. They weren't looking at her. They weren't looking at Susan. For the first time in years, they were looking at me. And the shame they'd so meticulously pinned to my name? It slipped off. Fell back where it came from. Daniel stepped back, lowering his salute with quiet finality. He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. I didn't move toward the microphone. I didn't speak again. I just stood. And that silence, that stillness, spoke louder than their years of dismissal ever had. The lounge felt less like a place to relax and more like a room built to contain things: sound, emotion, people. Velvet chairs arranged for civility, low lights made for secrets. Nancy sat across from me in cream and pearls, every button fastened, every fold pressed. She looked like she'd stepped out of a portrait someone forgot to frame. No smile. No apology. Just a remark, clinical and dry. You certainly made an impression. I didn't answer. There was no need. She took a sip of what was left in her coffee. She didn't seem to notice it had gone cold. The media's having a field day, she added. Some reports are complimentary. Others less so. I waited. I admit we weren't prepared, she went on. Not Susan. Not your father, if he were alive. Susan fainted, I said, voice like a closed door. Nancy blinked. She has delicate nerves. She has a fragile ego, I corrected. There's a difference. Her grip on the porcelain tightened. I didn't come here to argue. Then why are you here? She leaned forward slightly, a movement just shy of sincere. I thought perhaps you'd consider issuing a clarification. Something balanced. Reframing the situation. Publicly. I raised an eyebrow. You want a statement? A short one, she said, too quickly. Just to make it clear that things were misunderstood. That our perspective wasn't malicious. I laughed once, quietly. You don't want the truth. You want plausible deniability. Nancy's eyes narrowed, but she didn't deny it. You have to understand, she said. We didn't set out to hurt you. We were protecting the family name. You were challenging. Bold. I wasn't bold, I replied. I just refused to disappear. Then I opened the folio beside me and pulled out a document. I slid it across the table. She didn't touch it. Just stared. 7 years ago, this was submitted to the ethics board. Anonymous accusation. Falsified combat records. Bronze Star in question. Mental fitness flagged. Promotion labeled as political. She remained still. I was due for my first star that year, I said. The board never responded. They just moved on. So did my career. Nancy inhaled slowly. You're a high-profile figure. It could have come from anywhere. I slid another sheet forward. Internal analysis. Standard cross-referencing, vocabulary, tone, structural syntax. 96% match to Susan. Her lips parted, but I didn't stop. Secondary author, contributing language, phrasing, and context, Nancy. The silence between us turned leaden. I never filed anything, she said, after a long pause. No, I agreed. You just gave her access. Fed her the phrasing. Let her weaponize your doubts. She looked down at her coffee. Still untouched. Still cold. You didn't just abandon me, I said quietly. You sabotaged me. Behind closed doors. With precision. Tears threatened in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Carefully. as if even her breakdowns had to be dignified. I made choices, she said. Ones I thought were right at the time. But I never stopped loving you. I looked at her long and hard. No, I said. You just stopped showing it. The silence that followed wasn't laced with rage. It didn't shout. It simply settled. Thick. Final. Do you even know, I asked, voice soft but sharp, what it feels like to have your own mother erase you piece by piece until there's nothing left but the uniform? Her voice cracked, not with guilt, but with justification. I was trying to protect Susan, she said softly. She couldn't keep up with you. She didn't need to keep up, I cut in, colder than before. She just needed to be present. But you buried me so deep, I had to become a ghost just to breathe. Nancy didn't respond. Her face slackened, not with empathy, but with fatigue. Her composure, once airtight, sagged around the edges. She reached forward, not far, just halfway, a gesture that never made contact. I never wanted to lose you. You didn't lose me, I replied. You exiled me, then blamed me for staying gone. She said nothing. Her hand hovered, then slowly dropped back to her lap. If someone asks why I stopped showing up, I said, my voice low but firm, don't call it distance. Don't dress it up as miscommunication. Tell them the truth. You made a decision. So did I. I rose. Left the documents on the table. She didn't call out. She didn't try to stop me. That's how betrayal by a mother often looks. Not dramatic. Just 2 chairs. 1 conversation. And silence where love should have spoken. The wind off the Amalfi Coast smelled of citrus and salt. I stood barefoot on the terrace of a cottage carved into the cliffs, espresso in hand, the ocean stretching out like a quiet witness. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. No salutes. No inspections. No pressed blues or sharp corners. Just stillness. Just light. Just the space to exist without defending it. The media wanted a reaction. A headline. A soundbite. But I gave them none. Only a single moment, a salute exchanged in a gilded ballroom that said everything words couldn't. It was enough. The video went viral in 2 days. Over 3 million views. Caption, they laughed until she stood. I didn't comment. Didn't repost. Didn't need to. The Pentagon reached out a week later. Offered me a seat on the newly formed Joint Ethics Advisory Board, a committee forged, ironically, from the exact kind of betrayal I'd survived. I declined. Instead, I founded the Resilience Foundation, an initiative for soldiers and veterans undermined by their own families. We help them rebuild, not just careers, but confidence, trust, identity. Because sometimes, the fiercest wars are waged at home. In the quiet dismissal of your choices. In the silence of ignored birthdays. In the empty chairs at your own milestones. The irony? The people who tried to erase me are the reason no one can now. Months later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Nancy. She said she'd watched my PBS interview. The one about leadership, loyalty, and the unseen fractures that form when chain of command meets personal betrayal. She wrote, I didn't realize how far you'd climbed. I wish I had looked up sooner. But that's the thing. She saw me. She just didn't want to admit it. And now? Now she doesn't get access. Not because I carry hatred, I don't. But because I finally love myself enough to draw a line and not apologize for it. The military taught me how to survive under fire. But how to survive abandonment? That was a family lesson. And I've stopped bleeding from it. This morning, a boy from the village came with a basket of bread and figs. Barefoot, curious. He peered up at me and asked, were you really a Donald? I smiled, just a little. Once I said, now I'm just someone who chose not to vanish. He grinned, nodded, and took off down the stone path, laughter echoing behind him like a blessing. I turned back toward the horizon. This time, the silence wasn't punishment. It was freedom. Have you ever walked away? Not to hurt them, but to finally choose yourself? You don't have to explain. You don't owe anyone that. But if this story touched something you've carried, a name left off a list, a room that forgot you, a silence too heavy to hold, just drop a speech balloon. Or a single word. I'll see you. I'll read every one. Thank you for staying to the end. And if, for even 1 second, this made you feel seen, then I'm glad we found each other.